Recorded July 14th, 2025. Hello, Brody. Hello, Franklin. How are you doing?
Living the dream. Franklin, welcome.
Look at Frank. Frank Rod pinged me and told me to tell you hello. He's on the chat over there. Hey, tell Frank I say hello. It's good to have you back, Franklin. How are you, man?
Doing good. A nice relaxing cruise last week, so I'm ready to get back to business.
Back to business. Yeah, that's right. You were on the cruise. You and your dad. And
Yep.
And I have perfect time. I have your laptop bugged. That's how I knew you were getting off the ship when I pinged you. It's like,
oh boy.
Now he's through. That's how we do it. So we to our listeners, we are in July. This is our second week of Purview Summer Camp, where we talk all things Purview. So we're having Microsoft Purview experts from both external to Microsoft, internal to Microsoft, and those who are somewhere in between the external and the internal, right? The edge of the coin. We had a little bit of disruption last week where our first guest for Purview Summer Camp or Purview Month had some scheduling conflicts with travel. We will get Miss Renee Woods, who's part of the Microsoft program and product team, back on to talk about Purview. So we'll throw a double show on sometime during the back half of the month. Rod's going to be out for a little bit, even though this is his baby for the month. He's a Purview type of guy now. He has to go take care of some stuff personally, but rest assured he'll be back when he gets everything squared. So, Frank, I can't ask what you did because I know you were on vacation.
Vacation cruise.
Who's on a cruise? Just chilling.
Yeah, where?
What cruise ship were you on?
I went on Royal Caribbean Utopia of the Seas, their big ship. So it has like 7,000 passengers. They did a really good job. I recommend going on Utopia of the Seas, and the ship does make a difference that you're going on. So the only recommendation I have for people taking cruises is make sure you know your boarding time. So a few weeks earlier or a few weeks before the cruise or a month before the cruise, they allow you to book your boarding time. So remember to make sure you board. I boarded at 10:30, so I had a full day on the ship. So that's an important thing to do. So yeah, I had a good time with the family. And like I said, Utopia of the Seas, Royal Caribbean. It's highly recommended.
Yeah, my wife's a big cruise person. She not so much anymore. Not on that cruise line, Royal Caribbean. But we've done Virgin Voyages. The Steve Branson or whatever his name is that owns these and all the adult. And what's Branson's first name? Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. The silver hairy looking guy, right? That does that. I'm a big fan of Royal Caribbean. Considering I own a lot of their stock, and this actually it's doing so well. Who would have thought, right? I was looking at some of the positions today, and I was like, oh my God, Royal Caribbean is going through the roof. So I'm loving it, right? Too expensive to buy now. And as always, consult your financial advisor. This is just me talking about what I've done. Right?
Oh, I've been investing in everything you've dropped on this show in the last 5 years.
Really? That's why you're a millionaire now.
Yeah.
There you go. That's how it works.
Round was on me, man.
Yeah. So, Brody, what did you do all last week?
Last week it's a funny time in services. There's just folks are away because nobody wants to work in the summer, but people still do. So it's like some projects kind of ending at the end of the fiscal in Microsoft at the end of June, and then some just barely getting off the ground. So it's basically just been keeping busy enough and taking the appropriate days off to find that balance. And it's kind of just been it's a lot of different things. It's running security operations assessments for one company. It's a full zero trust rebuild for another company. It's a government standards requirement that's going to require a brand new Azure landing zone build out for another organization. So there's just a lot of cool things that are kicking off, and then we'll find out how I balance all of that later on, which is usually how it works.
Yeah, it's one of those weird times in Microsoft. If you've been in the Microsoft ecosystem any measurable significant amount of time, you know that the fiscal year ends in June 30th. So fiscal June 30th to June 30th, but there are some things that still, revolve around the calendar year. Elephant in the room, lots of changes at Microsoft over the last 2 weeks, right? So your partner, you are a customer that's deeply entrenched with it, you know that Microsoft had a significant reduction in force over the last few months. The most significant one happened about a week ago. With that being said, well wishes to those who are still, here, as well as those who are no longer at Microsoft. Those that know me that I work at Microsoft, for the entirety of this show, I've been a global black belt for Sentinel and XDR. That is no longer the case. My role as GBB is over.
Oh, what now? Are you in charge of podcast marketing? Are you in charge of the running division?
No, it's public. It's a public record that the GBB organization, while it's still intact, has been reduced by 75% across the globe. Gone.
Oh, okay.
So we've been reassigned as solution engineers. So I am a solution engineer, which is synonymous with technical specialist.
Right? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
There are only a few GBBs left in the Americas, and mostly the Entra GBB org was untouched. And there are 2 new GBB roles that are in America soon to be replicated, and they're reduced. That role will be GBB Security AI, or AI Security, and the other one will be business value GBBs. Don't get me done trying to explain what those are, but all the GBBs that you were used to having, Defender, a multi-cloud, modern SOC, unified SOC, which what I was, Security Copilot GBBs, they didn't really exist, but we cover that. Those are gone. Data security, Purview GBBs, those things don't exist anymore. All of those resources been reallocated back into the field to line up with the publicly announced new verticals, the way that Microsoft is operating. They've eliminated operational organization based on geographic location and went into verticals: oil, gas, professional services, things along that line. So I don't quite know where I landed yet. Like 3 teams sort of are vying to where I land. So we'll see where I land. I think I know where I'm going, but we'll see. I haven't made a mind yet. But that being said,
Brady, how much are you using Gen AI for your infrastructure as code?
For the code itself? I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like last week, I had to basically learn Terraform fresh, and I did it mostly with the assistance of Gen AI, and it helps so much. But I had a consultant under me who primarily works with Terraform, and he was already doing a lot of the groundwork. But then there's some add-on things, and there's some changes that needed to be made, and so I had to get more familiar with it as quickly as possible. That wasn't a strong suit of mine prior to. And between Copilot itself, a mix of Copilot, GPT when it was anonymized and not like customer specific, and then the actual GitHub Copilot, it made the entire thing just so much easier. I mean, I had it making readmes for me, cleaning up little things, like just little nuances of Terraform and calling the specific modules and things like, the annoying things that would just take you a while, right? And then like the base like code elements I could understand from some coding experience I've had previously. It was really, my wife just got back to work recently. She from having a kid, and she's like, thank God for Gen AI, because I'm able to just ramp up so much quicker now, with everything. And so I feel like this has just changed the way I work personally. So it was a big help for me.
I got to play with something that no longer exists. There used to be Windows Copilot. Windows Server Copilot. They pulled it out of the bill, and it could go into amazing stuff like, give me a readout of my security posture from a directory standpoint if you had it on a domain controller and all type of stuff. So I'm going through something ate up my directory at the house. I keep getting these error crashing my domain controls. I wonder if the new MDI sensor that I put down in some of the updates I did. So I don't know what's going on. I'll figure it out. The only other cool thing, we'll get our guests going. We got 1 minute before we can get them on. Someone's been trying to hack my front door Ring account. I can see it on my Rocky. They're trying to do some buffer overflow attacks.
I knew you were going to throw that Meraki in there at some point. And you just did that for me, didn't you?
Yeah, I just did it for you. Someone's actually trying to break my Ring. I'm looking at it, and I can see these particular buffer overflow attacks, and I can see that they're being launched from a CDN that's inside of Los Angeles. So it's probably not the origin point of the adversary, to tell the truth. I just put it blocked it. I'm like, I know you want to investigate it, right? And so, but it's I did a bunch of updates, and but I'm once the licenses expire, I'm probably going to go to Ubiquity or something, right? The product's good. It was free. It's no longer free. They've eliminated the VIP engineering thing program. That's how I used to get it for free a lot of times, right? That's gone. So you have to pay now. They give you a discount, but I'm not paying. If I'm going to pay, I'm going to go pay for something that I want and put it in there. So that's all that's going on. So we're going to go ahead and get our guest on. As we talked about last month, and even doing this month, July is, by virtue of the Security Insight Show. Notice that the Microsoft is sort of scratched out in there because listeners of the show know why. Certain Microsoft legal people told us we couldn't use the name, so it's the Security Insight Show now. Frank, we have to get you a shirt too. We're going to talk about all things Purview. So we're going to pivot and get one of the top Microsoft security partners in the U.S. On the call here. And if you've not heard of them, we've had them on previously, Cyclotron. And Cyclotron has a very in-depth and robust and skilled Purview team. And we're going to get two individuals to come on and talk about a very specific topic. Why do Purview implementations fail or fall short of the desired results, and proper planning and things as such. With that being said, let me get them out of the green room. Oops. And that stage. Nathan, Austin, good evening.
Hey guys.
So great to have you back, Nathan, and to have you on to talk about Purview. I know you've been chomping at the bit for this. You actually asked for this particular episode months ago. Before you've probably been instrumental while we are doing Purview month, because you were sort of like, "Hey, we need to do it. We need to do it. We need to do it. We need to do it."
It's true.
So I think we planned you in April, if
Yeah.
not before.
I think it was. Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah.
That old session just went so well that we're like, we got to get these guys back on.
Yeah, get it back on. So, Nathan, I'd like for you and also to introduce yourselves, whom you represent or / work for, and the topic, and let's get into it. The show is yours, sir.
Yeah, happy to do so. So I've introduced myself once on this podcast before, so I'll keep it rather short. But Nathan Berger, Director of Security Professional Services. I run the ProServe organization, a Cyclotron that does everything related to Purview deployments, Defender, Intune, Entra, Sentinel, and a few other areas as well. Pretty much anything that's Microsoft security or touches security architecture. I've got a team of amazing leaders and amazing architects and engineers that deploy these tools. One of those leaders is here with me. Austin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey guys, Austin Durush. So I'm a compliance delivery manager at Cyclotron. Nathan is my manager, and I oversee the actual delivery team of who does our Purview rollout. So I have a pretty unique insight into the exact reason some of these Purview deployments don't go the way we would expect them to every single time.
And his responsibility is to fix it in case they do go wrong.
Of course.
That's where the money is. Yeah.
So I've got a few places that we can start. Frankly, a litany of stories here. I think that one of the best ways to learn how to do something right is by hearing a lot of stories of how to do it wrong. That's why my partner and I watched all the Gordon Ramsay shows when he's yelling at people about how they cooked food wrong, because you learn not to make those mistakes really quickly. And I'm not going to yell at people, but I certainly want to share some stories about when they left something in the oven for too long or when they pulled it out too early, right? That's the kind of story I want to see. So I've got a few to start from, unless you guys want to start from somewhere else.
I love that. Austin, you can be honest with us. If he yells at you, just blink twice.
No, Nathan's great. I have not been yelled at, nor do I yell either. It's a very yell-free environment here at Cyclotron. We're proud of that.
That's good.
Sometimes it's customers yelling, but usually it's not.
Of course.
Or early on, I'll tell some stories about customers yelling. So the first one that I think of is one that I think is an easy one to avoid. So I'll keep it short. We did one of our earliest Purview deployments when I was at Cyclotron 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. Wow, it's been so long. I just hit my 6th year a few months ago. The deployment was with an organization that was in the services industry, and they had about 10,000 users. And they were so gung-ho about using their brand new E5 capabilities. We started deploying with them. Everything was happy-go-lucky. These guys were actually pretty smart too, very technically adept people that we were working with. And we got to the point where we were piloting sensitivity labels, ready to go with DLP policies, kind of doing a waterfall model to all the different components of Purview, which sometimes we'll do, sometimes we won't. But we got to labels. We started doing a label pilot. Users started seeing classifications, confidential, highly confidential, internal, public, that sort of stuff. And, we involved a legal in the pilot because, that's important. And legal jumped in and they just kind of called us to the side and they were like, hey, by the way, you're about to slap confidential on something. You didn't check with us. We're like, what? And we're like, yeah, that has major legal implications for calling something confidential. And we need to be really careful about how we roll this out. And then they shut the whole thing down.
Oh,
Started from scratch. It was awkward. We did it like a quick hard reboot. It was a hard reboot, but it was a quick hard reboot. They ended up dramatically changing the way that the label structure worked and simplifying it and changing the language and everything. And we'd done, huge validation rounds on the labels, the encryption, the pilot settings, how users interacted with the feedback, all lost. Right. So that was like 5 years ago, but that was one of our earliest major Purview rollouts. And it just kind of it killed me. It took the wind out of our sails.
Oh man. But to be fair, legal should be in the conversation, but that's a lesson learned, right? But I mean, that's too bad. You thought you had all the buy-in you needed, but ultimately they got to be there. They got to be at the table somehow.
So I'm going to try to be a little bit kind to my past self. When we made assumptions about working with clients, we assumed that, we check with them, hey, do you have buy-in to do this stuff? Right.
Oh yeah.
But now we go out of our way to personally check.
You've been burned by customers before? That's weird.
I know. It's crazy. Now we check that legal is actually on the call. Right. That's hey, smart. We're there. Right. Yeah. We hey, you have a policy. So the second one is policies. This one trips up customers the most. If you don't have a written information security classification policy that has been reviewed and approved within the last 12 months, what happens is we'll start talking about hey, your policy says confidential, your policy says something, right? And we'll map those into labels, get them reasonably interpreted into technical controls. It's not always one-to-one, most of the time it is. And then we'll make it available. But sometimes when we start from that policy, we start doing it using the policy, and then HR comes in or legal comes in partway through and goes hey, we were actually in the middle of revising that policy. Or someone else, the last legal team that was in here who all left last year, made that policy. I would say it's a shocking number of customers that do this. I mean, it's probably 70 to 80% of customers that we get in the room with, and they say we either need to scratch that policy and start new, or we need to make huge revisions to it.
You know what? I'm with you on that. At all the gigs I've been at Microsoft, same. It's oh crap, we need to update this, or this is the driving force between updating it, or something happened and we got dinged and we need to update it, and we're bringing you into adjacently, have the technology assist us with this. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that.
My favorite thing as a consultant was when they start asking us to put data into the policy. Hey, can you write this policy with us? Right. We're hold on. There's some legal implications here. We gotta be careful. We can suggest. Right. I cannot write. I'm not putting my words on your policy. But if you send it to us, we'll provide comments.
Of course.
On the policy.
Feedback, how we can map technical controls to your decisions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's the same thing. We start with a compliance project, and someone's you're going to make us compliant, right? You're going to sign off, right? And we're oh no, we didn't mean for that. Classic. Anyway, that's the first two. I've got more, but that policy one really trips people up. It really does.
Well, and as security practitioners, you're not used to working with those groups as much as now with data security, right? I mean, legal doesn't get involved with the endpoint needs a certain control, right? So or the identity, it's a lot different now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. A few others. Let me jump into the ones that I hope I call out a lot of listeners here. E5 customers who have been using the Defender stack wholeheartedly, and they love it. They've got Defender for Endpoint rolled out and all the other stuff. And then they go, hey, we haven't really deployed Purview yet. Let's deploy Purview because it's in E5 and we want to use it. And it's so well intended. right? It's like, we don't really have a business backing for justification to deploy this, but we know that it's a security tool that we own, so we should spend some time deploying it. And like, that is good. I don't want to like harp on that at all. What happens though is that without backing business justification for rolling out something like this, you get to the point where you start hitting end users and people are like, oh, I'm not letting you put that DLP policy in block. Who said that you could do that? I'm not letting you take action because someone did something they shouldn't be able to do. We don't have a policy there. Who's going to manage this thing? Right? So you get like that one rogue admin in the org who's like, I'm the Purview admin. And like, then they start turning it on. They start getting thousands of alerts. They don't know how to tune it well. They are frankly just getting an acceptable volume of alerts that's way higher, or acceptable validation, but the volume is way higher than what they can handle. And next thing you know, that person quits or goes to another job or just gives up. Infinite alerts forever. And the next person who inherits it goes, Purview's stupid. It creates so many alerts. We're turning this thing off. We don't ever want to talk Purview again.
Oh my God. Yeah.
You can also get the customer that you get in the room with a stakeholder finally after someone else made the decision to go with Cyclotron or any partner for decision. They ask you, why are we doing this again? And you have to kind of rehash that whole thing and give them their own reasons that other stakeholders. And that's, speaking of project breakdowns, I think I think lack of communication is one of the biggest issues we see, because the person that we design a policy around, or, if they do come to us with a paper policy of data classification that everybody's agreed on, it's not always everybody that you're working with that has agreed on the policy. So sometimes you'll end up with the stakeholders that have made the decisions disagree with the person that's actually letting you into the room to work on Purview, and you will get some disagreements there that you have to hash out. And I think that extends projects a lot too, where 4 out of 5 people have signed off on a design, for example, and that 5th person was the one person that you needed to actually talk to, because now you have to go back and redesign.
It sounds as though on the particular scenario is not identifying, and we keep using the word stakeholder or whatever, but not identifying the proper worker bee, right, who ultimately has to inherit this thing, right? Do you think it's because of the person, when the alerts are coming in, chances are that often that alert may not be going to the specialist of Purview, right? So let's look at it from a different standpoint. Your company and you guys are one of the better XDR practitioners and deployment entities out there. If you're living in the Defender portal, which Purview is not, and correct me if I say anything wrong, Purview is not actually sending any alerting telemetry into defender.microsoft.com or security.microsoft.com. Am I correct on that?
There's a switch in Purview portal, but I thought it was on by default, isn't it?
By
Isn't it
default.
Wrong.
That
I
was
think it's
answered.
sending over I think it's sending over. I'm trying to remember. You see, I was on vacation now. I forgot everything.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be sending over. I forget which alerts it's sending over, but yeah, it's going to be sending over alerts.
And I don't know if it's on by default, but I wanted to get that answer. It has to be a deliberate thing to do. And so when you're turning that on, you're maybe introducing the alert SOC operator to a different set of telemetry they're not used to looking at, right? And now all of a sudden, like, why is this stuff populating something that we spent all this time tweaking, tuning from Sentinel, XD, all the MDO products, right? Because the Purview doesn't have a MD moniker. There's no Microsoft Defender for Purview. It's just Microsoft Purview. So the Defender people and this modern SOC people are like, what have you done? You're doing this. Do you think that's a bigger reason that all of a sudden you're putting work on my back? Where are the compliance people who turn this thing on?
Exactly.
Probably, yeah.
You got to my next one, operations. You try to turn on Purview DLP alerts for cybersecurity operator, it like 60% of the time their eyes are going to glaze over, because they're going to look at this and go, well, I don't know if Jody from finance is supposed to be sending PCI out of the organization. Is that her job role? Right? Like, that's not a hard, someone's trying to break into our environment judgment. The initial, especially the initial period of Purview has to be, is that person actually allowed to do that? Are they supposed to be doing that? Or are they not supposed to be doing that? And that's much less of a, thank you, Dean. Dean says DLP alert goes by default to Defender. That's what I thought. the approach would be cybersecurity operators aren't looking at this from a hard scientific standpoint. It's a like business unit understanding, and it's sometimes a human judgment that has to be made more than it is there is someone definitely trying to get into our systems. It's more, are they allowed to do this? Does their manager allow it? Is this a business exception? That sort of thing. Different set of people. That's HR. That's legal. That's sometimes finance, right? Sometimes it's like data governance or compliance function. But it's not like, let's go look at our security telemetry and see if this person's actions are malicious and aligned to a vulnerability framework or attack framework most of the time. At least that's how we look at it. But
And I think that can also complicate delivery as well, because what is absolutely a no-go for customer A may be exactly what they want for customer B. There isn't really a standard Purview deployment. So it really depends on who you talk to. It depends on the industry they're in for the needs they have. And like we were talking about with like something as simple as a data classification paper policy, typically you're depending on those decisions to already be made. So the example that Nathan gave of Jody in finance, I think Jody was this person's name, Jody in finance sending PCI externally, that's a decision that ideally has already been made, whether or not that's allowed or not allowed. And then just the enforcement mechanism through Purview is what we help them build. But getting that gray area of you help us make decisions can take a long time to break a customer out of that mindset where they're not depending on us to think for them and just using our knowledge of the tool to actually enforce decisions that they've made with what you hope are the proper stakeholders in being legal, compliance, IT, and whoever has a say in the matter.
Yeah.
Right.
And you really are trying to bring two different entities in, because, Anton made a great thing, unified RBAC, right? Being able to do some semblance of filtering out these alerts. And there are huge amounts of changes that are occurring with Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps, that a lot of that DLP stuff is going away in that. It's all going to be in Purview. And so now you are extracting these alerts by not having the cloud event stuff go into the Defender portal, but now you're reintroducing it through another mechanism, and you're driving the SOC operators absolutely bananas being able to see this, right? Especially if I'm a SOC operator in the traditional sense, threat hunter, threat investigator, and the first time some person comes to me talking about audit, I'm going to hit the roof, about certain things, right? So that's a great example. So it sounds like buy-in from the proper stakeholders, so you don't scrap tremendous amounts of work already built and paid for and done. What's going on?
Frank
That's
doesn't
a question.
say.
That's fine.
Oh, I can't. Franklin, I can't see you, man.
I was raising my hand because I have a question.
Oh, you can tell when you're raising your hand, it's going into the
Yeah, that's
But I don't see you. You're doing this.
Right. So I got two questions. Obviously, the most important one is, since you've been doing this for such a long time, have you adjusted to the new Purview portal?
Question.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, yeah, that's driving me crazy. Every single time I go there, I'm like, oh, yeah.
I'm still nostalgic
let's
for the
talk
old one,
about-
but I've adjusted.
I'm with Austin.
So let's talk about Copilot, and also, has that increased interest in Purview because of that, and also now the integration of data classification versus document classification into Purview. How has that changed the business or the interest of customers coming to Purview?
Yeah, I'll let Austin answer that first. I've got my own answer to it.
It's a huge driver because Copilot doesn't create a data overexposure problem. It exposes a data overexposure problem. People have access to this data. They have no realization they have access to it. But through a few fairly innocent Copilot prompts, all of a sudden they have something in front of them that, oh, what else can I find out? I didn't realize I could see this, just because it's in a SharePoint site that's buried so deep that they've never accessed, but they're nested in a group that has access to it. There's a million reasons for it. That is the number one thing that scares customers about turning Copilot on, and that's one of the main drivers that brings customers to Cyclotron. Is we would really like to use Copilot. We have no idea what kind of hornet's nest we're kicking by doing it, and we need you to go in and ideally lay out some groundwork and some protections that will make us feel safe about rolling this out, whether it's a phased approach where they just want to turn it on And the core of that assessment is the data overexposure problem. It's not what is Copilot going to do. It's what issues do you have already that Copilot's going to potentially expose. And I really like a lot of the things that Purview is doing to help that. Originally, we would have to go in, we would have to look at data classification results, we would have to roll out sensitivity labels, we would have to go in and take a look at access that users had to SharePoint. And that's still very important to do. But to lower the threshold of Copilot, adding Copilot as a location that DLP can now monitor and having labeled content excluded from results that Copilot can return, whether or not you're enforcing access control through those labels, makes it a lot easier, because rolling out labels with encryption is significantly more complicated for organizations than turning on a DLP policy that just operates transactionally, and we're really just looking at how that document's been classified. So to answer your question, Copilot's, I would say, probably the number one driver we see in drumming up interest for Purview. But some of the features Microsoft's bringing to Purview is making that conversation a lot easier for us, which is nice.
It's the same thing with consulting on Microsoft too. It's the number one driver of Purview work right now. 100%.
Exactly. Yeah, for less technically minded humans who might be listening to this podcast, the way that I like to break this down in my own head is Purview isn't required for a Copilot rollout, but damn, does it help. Like, it really makes a big difference in the way that organizations protect their data. It is the only way, I think, or at least by far, if you look at the level of effort, the most effective way to secure your data. You have to roll out labeling right now to enforce classifications on the data, which means right now you got to have E5 in order to make this rollout secure with Purview, right? It's just kind of the way it works. Customers always ask that, like, do we need E3 or do we need E5 to secure Purview? The answer is E5 is really the way to go. Until Microsoft makes a way for you not to have to put labeling in the middle between Copilot can read it and, it should be not visible by Copilot.
Right.
Sorry, that
like
didn't
using
explain
SITs
it
or something like that instead of
Yeah.
labels. Yeah.
At some point, Microsoft will come out and say, here's a policy that you can use to say if it has a credit card, Copilot won't spit it out.
Right.
Today, the story is if it has a credit card, Purview puts a label on it. If it has that label, Copilot doesn't spit it out. So.
And then if I can plug one of my feature requests for Purview in case anybody from the product group is listening.
Brody and Ed will single-handedly go put that feature
Perfect.
in. Frank will too, now that he's here.
For the duration of the show, I'm just going to throw out my wish list and we'll see what comes true.
Let me get Copilot to record this so I can capture your wish list.
Please do. Perfect.
Yeah. All right.
I think one of the big things, like we already talked about, labeling is right now the only way to protect when it comes to Copilot as a location within DLP. But SITs are important. I think a very important filter, and this is already a condition you can use for endpoint DLP. So I'd really like to see it brought to Copilot. But one of the conditions you can use for endpoint DLP is content is not labeled as something that will, I think it will make customers feel a lot more secure about rolling it out, because I've had customers that want to treat their internal data as more of a whitelist approach where they select what can be visible to Copilot as opposed to selecting what cannot be visible. So if you have a condition like content is not labeled, you can theoretically make Copilot blind to all of your data except for what's been specifically labeled to be visible to Copilot. And that's just another angle that would allow customers to feel like they're safely entering that world as opposed to turning something on, plugging their ears and hoping nothing terrible happens.
I love that. That's like a secure by default approach. I think
exactly.
Fantastic addition. Good call.
Yeah, I think those things will come. Right, Microsoft hears their customers there. So I've heard two additional ones that I didn't have on my list, but when I was brainstorming this originally, I thought of and I meant to put in. Ed, you mentioned one, which I'll remember in just a second. Austin, you just mentioned one about encryption options, which is so funny to me. Another big reason why Copilot deployments fail. Sorry, Copilot, ignore that. Scratch that from the record. Another big reason why Purview deployments fail is because of people being over eager about encryption options.
Oh yeah, easily. Oh my god, they go right head into it. Like it could ruin the whole vibe. That's it. It's like, oh, all of a sudden I've locked out the entire company from all of the important work, and we fixed it within a day. It doesn't matter. You're never turning that thing on again. Like probably.
Yep. Yeah, we have had some healthcare customers in the past who have said PHI shouldn't be available externally, and rolled out on auto labeling for PHI being available or blocking it from being opened by external recipients. Not recipients, sorry, external users. That's really important, right? Because this wasn't an email control, it was a file level control. So then, of course, that starts rolling out, starts encrypting files, and we quickly get reports of like, hey, why can't my patient access their patient portal document? We're like, okay, that's a big problem. That's like a really, really big problem. We had to do some major reversal of controls for that one.
Oh man, that's got to be a huge pain.
And that is a consistent and persistent issue for industries that work with other sensitive information. Finance companies, not your banks, but investor companies who all of a sudden I want to see something, but I can't open it because I'm using Gmail as my primary, communication medium. I'm not an internal user, right? Technically. And then they don't realize I'm not going to give this person who's a customer an internal email address to the customer, to the company, right? I've seen that happen in finance. Like, what happened? I can't open my financial reporting my investor reporting this month. Yeah. You would think people wouldn't do that.
And then the panic, they delete the label that implied the encryption, and then they're then there's a whole new can of worms. But yeah, I think pairing auto labeling with a label. So if you're talking about, server-side auto labeling for your data at rest, pairing that with a label that enforces access control and encryption is probably one of the more dangerous things you can do. I'd recommend against it entirely unless you know exactly what you're targeting. You've gone through simulation. You know that there's a very small amount of files that are going to be identified, because putting those things together is a very quick way to ruin your week.
Well, that needs to be further down the maturity curve. If you're starting off with that, you're not doing it right. You need to start and build and grow trust. And like, that's like a year plus down a very highly managed program to implement this. That is not like a day one thing.
And that's what we talk about, is protecting the movement of your data through DLP policies and pairing that with your labels as conditions. But if you go into it, and that's one of the things, it seems more daunting because it is extremely daunting. If you're going from a 0 on your Purview deployment to your wish list being everything auto-labeled with encryption, those conversations are going to take so long. It's impossible to ever even get that car on the road. You have to start with labels that, in my opinion, are doing nothing more than tagging the data, building DLP policies around that for Copilot, for email, for SharePoint, and controlling that movement, and then really identifying through Activity Explorer what those trends look like, what content is being tagged. And then once you know exactly what you have, then you can start talking about encrypting at rest. But until then, nothing more than manual application is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the problem sometimes is that the actuator of the thing is the person that's reviewing it. So now you have to put in another team when you look at the Activity Explorer to say, is this legitimate that we should enforce this or let this ride, right? So if you are the person that's controlling the keys and turning the key, it's all hard to do it, right? Then you got to pull in the audit team, then God forbid anybody in security wants to involve the legal team into it, right? To derail their project timeline, right? Because the legal will go, well, we don't think it's right because we don't understand it, so it must be wrong.
Yeah.
There you go. That's it. We have a question in here, and I don't know if it's on topic. Any insights around customer managed keys versus Microsoft managed keys? Your experience.
I don't know if it's on topic.
Yeah, I'll try to give maybe a 20-second to Anton for here, because I've been thinking about this question as he asked it. I try to admit when I don't have as much experience as I should to be able to answer a question, and Purview has a ridiculous amount of features and also interoperability between them. Customer managed keys, I've had a few customers do it. I don't have a lot of customers do customer managed keys. Unless you have like a really specific compliance requirement, don't touch it. That said, there are major implications. There are a bunch of features in Purview that don't work the same way when you have customer managed keys. So there's some considerations that you really shouldn't be touching that unless you're 100% sure that you have a compliance requirement that requires you to manage all your encryption keys, and the Microsoft built-in encryption keys, which do work for the vast majority of customers, don't work for you. After that, yeah, there's some weird technical controls, right? Encryption is going to work differently across the entire stack. You're going to have to manage your key, rotate it effectively, right? There's stuff there, but that's as far as I'll go. Austin, if you have anything to add, feel free to, or not, either way.
I would just say, in my experience, and I'm probably with you, I don't have as much with customer managed keys or as much experience, but I don't end up with a lot of customers asking about it specifically. They're more than happy to offload their encryption needs to Microsoft. I mean, just simply checking a box saying encrypt this content and then making sure IRM is enabled usually satisfies a lot of needs, and most customers don't want to get into the weeds on managing it themselves.
Good call. Only highly regulated public sector customers are the only ones that I've worked with that really have to go down that route. So I would agree with those statements.
And they're generally sophisticated enough. If they ask them questions, they know what to do.
Right.
Well, every customer that comes to me and says, "We want to manage our own keys," they're trying to figure out how Microsoft allows me to do it. They know what they want to do. They just want to figure out how to do it. More if it's a transition. The average customer doesn't. The only time I see that question come up is in the RFP. Can we manage our own keys, or can you manage your own keys?
Yeah. No, I'll end this with I'll end this conversation or side topic with a brain teaser, which is that in the SOC 2 compliance requirements in the compliance manager template, they have hold your own key as a way to meet SOC 2 is suggested by Microsoft. I don't know if I 100% agree yet. I don't think I've made up my mind or dug into that enough to figure out is this really the right thing? But that might be in the fork in the road for this discussion. So I'm just going to leave that there and move on.
Leave that off the table. Let's get back on the Purview thing.
Kind of like most of my customers do with Purview. They just kind of oh, we know that's a problem. Let's leave it and move on.
We'll come back to it sometime.
So I'm going to do a nerdy technical one, and then I've got one more, I think might be my last one. I'm not going to commit to that yet, but that just really grinds my gears. So the technical nerdy one is you start doing a Purview deployment. You say, this is my SIT. You write that design document. We do our unified delivery approach that we have at Cyclotron with our SDF. It's a whole thing. But we finally get to the point where we start testing these definitions. We've said we're going to look for PCI across our environment, or my favorite one, we're going to look for PHI for healthcare. So let's say we're doing PHI. In this case, we're looking for data that meets their PHI requirements. Okay, what does your document say? Your document says any data with a full name or physical address is PHI. That has to do with a patient. And they go, okay, I'm going to go configure Purview to look for any healthcare language, any full name, and any physical address in a document. And they go turn on DLP, and it hits 100,000 items in the first day. Stuff that's okay, this is really not a good idea. We need to, this is unmanageable. That's not all PHI. We found one that was just an invoice to somebody, and they called that
It's
PHI.
got a name on it.
Right. And it didn't even have the operation. It was just you need to pay your invoice. And that was it. But it had their name, it had a physical address, and it had something in there some people might consider that PHI, to be fair. But there are so many false positives that come up in document detection when they're using definitions that are super broad, that the number one lesson here is validate your definitions. What does it take? What does it look like, right? Because the moment I tell customers that, they go, how do I validate my definitions? Well, you got to make sure your stuff isn't hitting too many false positives, and you got to make sure it is not causing false negatives, right? Or at least it's a reasonable rate of misses if that happens. And their eyes glaze over, and they're like, how do I do both of those things? And I'm like, well, for each one, you've got 2 steps you need to do. And they're like, oh no, so this starts branching out, right? But this takes a second to explain. I've built diagrams for customers. We have a whole framework that we use for this. It's the biggest heartache in deploying Purview when you get into DLP or auto labeling by far. So how do you avoid false positives? This is easy. You look at the documents that are alerting, right? Conceptually, I know it's not really easy, but you look at the documents that are alerting, and you pick how many are actually supposed to be caught and how many aren't supposed to be caught. And then you do another tuning round, and you figure out, is that the same proportion or not, right? I know that's a really simplified approach. There's a bunch of nuance to that. But false positive tuning can be done rather scientifically. You can say, I've tuned my definition, and now I've found that I'm only getting 10 extra hits per 100 instead of 50 extra hits per 100 that I shouldn't be detecting, right?
I love trainable classifiers for that. It's super easy to train the model.
Yes. I've got a lot to say there. Yes. I think probably Austin does too, because he is so close to this. There's a lot for false positive tuning that you can do we usually say 85 to 90% of the hits that you get in a policy should be true positives. We call that true positive rate versus false positive rate, right? Normal science data validation testing. You want to make sure that 9 times out of 10 or 8.5 times out of 10, when a security operator goes into an alert, it's the right stuff. They're not wasting their time. It's hard to hit that number, especially when you're looking at certain types of definitions, but that's like the gold standard for us. We want to make sure that our customers are at that point. Most times when we talk to a customer, it's like a 10% true positive rate, right? Or they're like, hey, we have problems. This tool is nonsense, right?
Yeah.
We can't really reasonably filter what is and isn't.
And that's why I think to Edward's question earlier about who manages the alerts and where do the alerts go. I mean, excuse me. It, in my opinion, it takes a separate team. It's not the security team and their classic disciplines that need to be addressing this from an operational standpoint. You need to have a SOC for data. You need to have a security governance team, right, with a separate set of disciplines and skills to work through this. This is similar to tuning security alerts. It's just tuning compliance alerts effectively, right? But like crossing the boundaries between these two roles is a lot for one given individual to take on in their role. And I personally advocate for a separate team. Of course, understanding it's not always possible depending on your org size and budgets and yada, yada, yada. But it's its own thing, right? And if you thought tending security was a garden, tending Purview and data security is certainly a garden, complex garden.
And not only having a separate team, but you need a liaison, someone that can put feet in both sides so that any request doesn't seem adversarial or someone trying to pass off the work, right? Like that's your job. That's your job. You know,
That never happens. Come on.
Yeah, it never happens. Going back to the definition creation, is it more of what is included in a particular piece of digital asset versus what is not in it? Meaning, when you're training a model, it's a and mentality. Like if you have the name and their address and their SSN or portions of it, and oh my God, don't put the credit card or whatever you build on it. Is that the stacking of how you build effective definitions by having and statements of I need this amount of relevant data to flag this thing? Is that the general approach that you guys go? Because to me, it seems like it's obvious. You put this stuff in report mode or test mode. You can test all this stuff. Why are people testing this stuff?
No, that's a great call out. And that's typically what we do because, you know, the more complex you make the requirements for a match, the less results you're going to have. I've seen it be a problem from the other side where you run simulation across 4 million documents and you have 50 results for PHI. Then there's every single result you found is accurate, but you know that there's a lot more content out there. And then you kind of have to walk that back. This is too restrictive. Maybe we don't need 3 elements. Maybe we need 2. We open that up and then we all of a sudden have 3,000 matches, but now we can start to whittle that away. So the problems really come on the extremes, either not enough matches, but everything's a very high confidence match, or too many false positives. And then you start, adding your and statements to eliminate that. A funny story that I'll tell about this is we had a PHI, I think it was an auto labeling policy. It might've been DLP. I think it was actually DLP now that I'm thinking about it. And it was tuned. It had gone through several iterations and they were very, very happy with the results, except one thing that it caught was a newsletter. And that newsletter that they had was full of dummy PHI. So it's examples of what PHI may or may not be. And it met
training doc. That's funny.
Exactly. You're looking at it and it looks like it's PHI. The only reason it wasn't is because one person said, no, this isn't PHI because I created this. This has no bearing. So then we had to add negative clues in there that said, okay, if it has the word newsletter, if it had, and you will get into those types of situations where, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but one person is telling you that is not a duck, and that is now delaying the project. So we have to go back and redesign something for one specific subset of documents that they have all throughout their unstructured data set. So stuff like that can get pretty interesting. But yeah, like you said, Edward, it's very much depending on what the results are telling us. It's either making it more exclusive or more inclusive until we find a balance we're happy with.
What is the primary work vector that you guys find yourself have to address? Is it still email stuff transitioned via an email rather than stuff being transitioned via SharePoint, Teams?
Like
whatever?
Like, what's the biggest data exfiltration source that we're seeing?
Yeah.
Good question. Endpoint by far.
Mm-hmm.
Endpoint catches a lot more by nature.
Mm-hmm.
People, I think the clever people generally understand that when they're doing something on a company cloud system, like company email or SharePoint, like the company can see that, right? They get DLP bounce backs. I do think, though, that people think they're really sneaky with their Gmail accounts still.
So obvious,
Yeah. Some people have gotten clever by virtue of them not knowing any better. I think I've said this at least 4 times on the show that DLP incidents can occur, something that a customer is trying to be diligent. Like, still, I think they're still in business. Someone installing a cloud backup like Carbonite and backing up their entire stuff. Now you just call the DLP incident because you're just trying to make sure your data, is okay, right? You're saying, I'm just going to put my data here to keep it safe, because I heard you should put it in the cloud. OneDrive, people, not Box. If you're not authorized.
OneDrive's in the cloud? Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. I see your hand now, Frank. You put it in front of your face, not just it. Go ahead.
So we've talked about tuning and the statistics and so on. Does the Purview interface actually facilitate this, or is this a specific tool you're using? How do you go about this process?
Yeah, good question. We've not developed a custom solution yet for this. The Purview interface supports it from 4 different angles, each giving 25% of the story, it feels like. I know this is kind of a nightmare of what I'm about to say. I hope your guys' eyes roll from this, but we use export to Excel for the initial pass for any data filtering, right? Literally just go into the portal, take your policy results, filter to one policy, export to Excel, and the first pass on validation is just look at the document name or email name and see if you can just be sure that from the email name or document name it's PHI or PCI or whatever you're validating. From there, then that cuts out 80% of the time you would have to take, right? If you're like if it says it hit PCI and the email says invoice on it, 90% of the time that's going to be true PCI, right? So we just mark that as PCI, we move on. You really want to spend your time effectively on the few that you're not sure about, and then that optimizes your time so that you can validate a policy very quickly. Eventually, AI will be validating these policies for us, but it'll be AI assisted because there's still some human judgment that has to happen on whether Jody was really allowed to do that or not. Right.
We're still
That
in the
said,
loop for now.
Yeah. There's a point I want to make about data security investigations later on because that's such a cool new Microsoft feature, but I'm going to hold that for a minute. The one that makes me panic, the one that keeps me up at night, is still false positives. Sorry, that's not wrong. Not correct. Words are hard. Nothing's anything. False negatives. That's the one that keeps me up at night still. When we talk about validating false negatives, you can't download a list of false negatives. Or at least you think you can't, right? So because you're looking for something that your tool didn't detect. So there's nothing in the tool that will tell you that you didn't detect something unless you've already messed up earlier in the process. And here's what I mean. If you started with your definitions way too broad to catch everything, and then you narrowed them down, and then you found that there were some things in the earlier report that you should have caught that you didn't in the new one, that's one of the rare times that you're going to see in data that you found a false negative, that there was something that DLP should have caught and missed in the one you were planning to roll out to your production environment. That's the only time that you'll find false negatives. So careful tuning. It's okay to start a little bit broad, get that downloaded, then narrow the definition to find what you're missing. But that exercise is like 5 times the effort, the false positive stuff. I don't think I've seen any customer really take that exercise seriously.
Well, is it false negative detection called audit?
Okay, you're getting to the grind my gears point. Okay. So I'm going to go off here. Sorry.
No apologies.
The thing that grinds my gears the most when I see Purview deployments, by far, is when people say, I've turned on DLP. And I say, cool, what's it doing? And they say, nothing. You didn't turn on DLP. You're just putting alerts into an email box that's being ignored, intentionally being ignored. I'm sure of it. because they get alerts and they're not doing anything about it. They're like, well, sometimes we review them. Like, okay, how many do you get a day? They're like 200. You're not reviewing them. you have one person staffing this. There's no way that they're doing that. That's their entire day. So when people say I've deployed Purview, but they've never set anything to block, that drives me crazy. Deployed Purview DLP specifically.
Checks the audit box though.
Oh,
DLP deployed. Yeah.
Or it's scoped to one user because they got too many alerts in one day and they said, let me just apply this to one like service account, for example, and then we never have to worry about it, but it is turned on.
Yeah, we've seen that. Absolutely. We love it when we see people going, yeah, we have DLP policies in block mode. We're like, yeah, let's take a look. Oh, that's cool. That's deployed to 3 people, 3 testers in your IT department who are no longer employed at your company, right? And that's how it goes, man. So that's the one that drives me the craziest is when people say I have DLP, and I go, what is it doing for you? And they go, absolutely nothing. Like, okay, you've paid for this tool at this point. What is going on?
Well, when you say DLP, okay, to get to what I'm going to ask this question, what does DLP stand for?
Yeah.
Data loss prevention, right?
Dynamic linking popsicle.
I was trying to think of like a really witty TLA, but I couldn't in time.
When people deploy it, is it, I guess what you're saying when they deploy it that way, when they say it's doing nothing, so it's actually not, it's not preventing anything, right? It's just
DLD.
Policies in.
DLD.
Data loss detection. Like I think that'd be it. It's not really prevention.
Yeah,
no, you're right. It would be logging it.
Yeah.
Your data loss logging.
Yeah, not if it's only scoped to 3 users. And I wanted to go back. I don't want to derail where we're at now, but there was something that was brought up interesting about endpoint DLP and something that I wanted to talk about specifically with Outlook and Exchange. And I worked with someone before that had a lot of CUI data. They were a DoD contractor. And one thing that's interesting about CUI data is unless you're on a GCC high tenant or something else that's FedRAMP moderate, I believe is the minimum that's required to store CUI data, you really can't have it anywhere in your Azure tenant. You can't have it in M365. You have to have a designated repository for it. So one thing that a customer showed me was they had a DLP policy. They had CUI labels. And I was like, well, you're labeling content that shouldn't be there to begin with. So unless you have some sort of workflow that says if label is detected for CUI, then you have somebody manually moving it or a tool moving it, you're just pointing to the fire, but you're not putting it out. Like there's still a problem. They said, okay, we understand. So they bought a tool that was FedRAMP moderate. I think it was box.com is what they bought. And we configured a separate tool to go in, find other CUI, automatically move their content. And then they're like, okay, great. Now we have a DLP policy that prevents CUI from being emailed because they could link to box.com. That's how they shared their CUI when it needed to be sent, but it couldn't be sent via Exchange. I said, okay, great. How many people have tried to do that though? And they said, well, probably a lot. We've blocked it. I'm like, well, now that's sitting in their drafts or that's sitting in an outbox. And now that is stored in Exchange and you have a CUI data set that's now, because people look at Exchange and they think it's a method of communication, which it is. It's transactional, but it can also be a location where data is stored and people don't always look at it that way. So we went in and we configured an endpoint DLP policy that even prevented a CUI labeled document from being attached to Outlook through the restricted apps list. So endpoint DLP can be used for things like that specifically, where even getting it into the Teams chat, DLP may block it, but if you're allowing it to interact with the app, it's now sitting somewhere that it's not approved to be. So I wanted to bring that up because endpoint DLP can do a lot of things before it even gets to the point of Outlook or Teams or SharePoint, because you can control SharePoint sharing through the SharePoint Admin Center. You can just restrict who you're allowed to share to. So I thought that was an interesting use case when we went through it, because endpoint DLP can be used as an additional layer, but even a layer that is tripped before we get to the point of attempting to send the data. It doesn't even allow it to attach it to a draft.
Extremely valid point. I never even thought about that. They're just sitting, and now it's just a risk sitting there in a drafts folder in a mailbox where it shouldn't have been. Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, because now you've sort of circumvented the endpoint DLP because you put it in an information exchange application.
Exactly.
Not exchange, but you know what I'm talking about. Somewhere you can exchange information or transfer information. I think about that, and even, well, you can stop it for OneDrive, because I'm seeing that now. A lot of people are stopping it from doing it in OneDrive and these other cloud box, Dropbox, definitive cloud apps stops a lot of that stuff and all that. I think that's moving away from that in a minute. Yeah, they're moving away from all that. So we've talked about, the title of the show was why Purview X deployments, whatever process you're doing, fail. How about we get to the point of the show? Well, give me a great story about Purview. When you went in, it was simple, and you went.
Can we take one step back, Edward, and talk about the data security that Nathan was going to mention?
Data security investigations. I'd be happy to.
Oh, okay.
You said you were going to hold off on that, so
no, it's fair. I do want to address Ed's first, and then I think we'll get into the DSI stuff, the new Copilot for security features, because I think those are pretty cool. But no, you're asking the right question, Ed. So we've talked about why Purview deployments fail. Why do they succeed? How do they succeed? I promise that not all of our time is just making Purview deployments fail, right? We actually, these are mostly stories from very early on. We've refined our approach. We've now done, I think, over 300 deployments in the last 2 years. Half of them were related to Copilot, half of them weren't, but they're almost all enterprise deployments. Cyclotron has probably if not the furthest reach, one of the furthest reaches on Purview deployments as a whole for seats. Like, we impact millions of seats per year on how people deploy Purview successfully. So I do feel like we're the authoritative source to talk to about this. A successful Purview deployment starts with a good data classification policy, internal business alignment, not that you're forcing HR and legal to show up to every call, but that they're there when you need them and they get why you're doing what you're doing. Those ones, the ones where HR and legal are like, hey, I get the value of this project. Yeah, I'll contribute. I'll take a look at what it looks like to operate communication compliance. Yeah, I'll run through e-discovery. That's great. We don't need them on every call, but like once a week status, just sending them the report saying, hey, we're this far in deploying Purview. That's good stuff. Another aspect that we see that makes people successful is hiring, whether you like it or not. No one wants to hire for Purview, but it is the most successful we've seen when someone says we have 4 people that as part of their jobs will be operating Purview. Perfect, right? That's what we do. Not getting aggressive with labeling. So that means starting with labels in non-encryption settings. Yeah. Taking a diverse approach to mandatory versus manual versus default versus recommended versus automatic labeling. Diverse meaning some people get multiple of those. Some people just get mandatory, right? Legal teams, HR teams, they get mandatory labeling. Vast majority of the time you tell them, we're going to make you classify every email and document. They go, okay.
Awesome.
Right? They love it. But then you get to marketing and they're like, why the hell are you having me do this?
Yeah.
We're not going to click
like
that button, right? For those people, you do recommended labeling, right? When it comes up, but you don't make them do it by mandatory. But you find the people who are dealing with the most sensitive data in your organization, you explain to them data classification is important for compliance requirements to be able to identify all our PCI easily, like we say we do. We're going to make you classify your documents now. And they're usually begrudgingly like, okay. And then it's a week of heartache of people clicking buttons, and then they get used to clicking the button. Next thing you know, it's just a normal thing. We've talked to a few customers recently who we did mandatory labeling with, some who did it on their own. The consistent feedback was users complained about mandatory labeling for 1 week, and then they never said it again. And it's just become part of our culture that you classify the documents and emails you're working on.
That's a great breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those and then insider risk, that one's tricky for customers. Just making sure that one is tuned well. There's like 150 different controls you can do to tune a policy. One policy. There's so much. Actually, there's probably more than that. Honestly, it's probably like 400.
Just hit the easy button and make it go automatic.
Yeah, there you go. There's an easy button. Integrating HR systems into insider risk and into communication compliance are great. Badging systems, EHR systems, that kind of stuff.
It's still just through like a translated file, though, right? It's not. There's not direct API to some of these systems yet.
Yeah, it's like either JSON data import or it is CSV data upload. There's still not really a native API approach to it.
Why would you integrate these systems?
How do you?
Well, because
why would you integrate them?
You pull it automatically, right? As opposed to having to translate like the badging system information or the levers joiners is a good one that we do, right, Frank? Where it's like somebody's leaving the org. Okay, their 2 weeks notice is now in the system, and now that triggers insider risk actions A, B, and C to like make sure they don't put anything on a USB stick. And it's better if it was direct integration versus shoving that into a CSV and then translating it to the format that IRM can read.
I think the biggest play for AI is understanding insider risk, because you're starting to look at all type of behavior, right? I decided to work after hours more. I want to do something because I want to export to a PST file, or insider risk could be, any combination of behavior. When you look at insider risk, you're looking at usually entity behavior, right? And that's you need AI for that, right? Yeah. Because you have to look at behavior and operational changes at the same time.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
10-second story.
Adaptive protection came out like a year ago now, and it helps with that a lot. And I'm sure there's going to be even more improvements if you start linking up like Security Copilot and other LLM-based solutions to it.
Yeah. So why do you connect these things? Quick answers are: your HR system connected to insider risk management can put a lot more scrutiny on people's 2-week notices, and also look before they submitted the 2-week notice to give you indicators if they tried to exfiltrate data before telling you that they're leaving. Yeah. It also does the same thing retroactively for people who quit on the spot. You can plug in EHR information into your insider risk system using a custom connector to score certain activities like EPCS system events for drug related stuff, or dealing with PHI in a weird way, or disabling a patient account alongside the rest of their activity to see if they're doing something suspicious. You can integrate a badging system to see if someone's using a badge after their employment date ends. Like, it's wild stuff that you can do. That stuff has flown so under the radar. I feel so bad for Microsoft engineering. They've done such an incredible job on this. And every time I talk to an HLS customer, they're like, what do you mean we can plug in our data? Like, yeah, you can put your badging data in. You could put your EHR data in. You could put your HR data in. Even your CRM data, right? There's a custom connector for Insider Risk Manager. You can feed it through JSON. It's amazing. It's good stuff.
Well, Microsoft engineering originally built it for Microsoft, so they still got their hands full with the internal why it even exists in the first place. But I concur with you that it's rare that I get customers to really get to that level. As part of the engagements that I'm with, it's usually a POC, but we don't really get into that detail. And it's not that some people out there wouldn't want to do it. It's just that's the trend I've seen. But it's powerful.
It tends to be more post-mortem. The horse or the boat has left the port or the stable, then you want to go back and see previous behavior that lend to that coming up. But I can look at it by just using IRM. That would be my first thing. What files should not have been open outside company confines, but you see in this same file that pertinent to this person's job is trying to be opened by a Gmail account that's associated with that person. They're testing whether they were able to get the file out to the house and open it up. Salespeople, I want my book of business to come with me.
Exactly.
You bet your butt. These are my contacts, right? To be able to do that. It stands to reason why Microsoft has betting a huge amount of intellectual know-how, property, in this product, right? It's come a long way since Compliance Manager. I still like Compliance Manager when you just go to the frameworks and download it. And you were able to cheat. A customer says, "Hey, I need you to put together me a plan to do this." And you just go there and say, CMMC 2.0 and download it. And here's a checklist, and you go.
Done.
Yeah.
You're done, right? Here you go. Let's go do these things. Now you're ready for 3PAO, assessment. You're good to go, right? Yeah. This has been great. I was about to say we could talk about this for the entire month, but the entire month is Purview month. So, because you're not the guest on the next show doesn't mean you guys can't come in. We love to have you sit in the shadows on our YouTube to comment. When you hear something, throw it in there. One of the things I want to investigate is trying to get our Discord a little bit more active. And I'd love to have our previous guests maybe get access to our Discord and be able to answer some of these questions. I see a huge benefit of being able to create that medium of exchange, because they know that you are at Cyclotron and you're answering a lot of questions, sort of like the CCP program. You probably can drive business. Like, these guys answered my questions. I think I'm going to go see what they're doing. Go to their website and check it out. This has been awesome. I know we're up at 13 against it, which gives us 13 minutes back past our opening. Nathan and Austin, it's been great. I super appreciate of meeting you. Almost a year to the date, right, Nathan? Up in Chicago.
I think it's been actually 2 years. It was like 23.
Yeah, it's 2 years. Oh my God. Yeah,
Yeah,
two
it's been a
years.
it's been a
Crazy
minute.
thing. I was on a different team. I was on that team, then got switched to a team, and then I came back. That's right. Damn,
Yeah.
2 years. Man, Brody's getting old.
I am. I'm turning 40 this year.
Really?
Love
You
it.
know what I
Yeah.
would do to turn 40 again?
So I want to give my closing thesis statement on
Go
all
ahead.
this, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Purview deployments are really hard. They are. There's no escaping it. 99% of the projects that we go through, we have contention about how to do it the right way. It's not Defender. There's no template to deploy this. There's things that you should be doing, general data leakage, but like most of it's industry specific focus. So a few things. We specialize in industry. HLS is our number one focus. Manufacturing and finance are equal after that. And then after that comes retail and consumer goods and government and the rest. But we do a huge amount of HLS focus. We have seen PHI up the wazoo. We just have done pretty much anything you could possibly do with PHI deployments. We also have developed for every customer Captain, which is compliance as a service. So we manage Purview in your environment. We tune it for you over time. We provide compliance operators. We reason on this stuff, right? That's an incredible service. We're super stoked on it. We have HLS customers on it now. They love it. It's a whole thing. So if anyone listens to this and goes, yeah, I don't think we can overcome some of these business problems just easily, we will do it for you. And we're aggressively low cost about it. It's actually maybe a little too low right now, but it's good stuff. We're in a promotional period for pricing on Captain. So Captain is the number one way to do it. Otherwise, if you have complex problems, you want to bring them to Cyclotron. All we do all day, not really all of it, but a good amount of what we do all day is just helping customers solution these problems using the maximum features of their E5s and beyond to do the Microsoft security stuff, to make you successful with all your objectives. You want to reduce ransomware? We're here. You want to protect your data from leaving? We're here, right? Pretty much everything under the Purview stack that you can do. You want to implement compliance? We do that as part of Captain. It's part of the service, right? But we can also do it standalone in a project. And if you're an enterprise customer, you can leverage ESIF funding. We are big on that. So we also have other ways of doing it. Anyway, that's our services. So Austin runs that. He's the one that is primarily responsible for helping customers. He's the point of escalation you go to first. Austin is part of the program that we run as a whole, so we can do other stuff as well. But hey, I'm on the Discord. I'm happy to answer questions. I joined it as soon as I discovered there was a Discord. It seemed awesome. And I love the Defender for Gardening channel. It makes me very happy. But if you want to ask more questions to Austin and Austin, I'll drag you onto the Discord server, but I'll be there to help answer things. I did want to talk a little bit about data security investigations, but maybe we can save that for another day. It's a new Microsoft Copilot for Security feature that does Purview investigations for you. It kind of competes with our managed service. So I wanted to talk about it because I think it's super cool and interesting.
Let's get you back on because it's a huge topic. It deserves its own episode.
Yeah, I think we should have made you have a part 1 and part 2 of this right here. enough days in the month. I'm looking at my calendar. We'll always squeeze you in. One thing I want to end the show with is that I think that Austin and Nathan are really short selling the capabilities of Cyclotron. So let me throw it out there how innovative these guys are, because I'm going to coin the phrase, these guys are, a 9-trick pony. Not a 1-trick pony, because you got Okta the migration, Entra migration tool, Cyclotron Beam. Know it, seen you guys do it. Captain, I did not know about compliance as a service. Teams Hub, Office 365 security and governance tool. Slacko, Slack the Teams migration tool. Jive the 365 migration tool, as well as custom development. That's what I sort of use now going forward to differentiate partners who say they're partners and partners who get it. Because if you do not have an internal dev personality, it's hard. Everybody's a developer. You got a dev, whether you're using Copilot for GitHub or any of these AI models to help. You're still going to have dev. And because these tools are there, that expectation from your employers is like, why don't you know how to write this code? Right? I've heard that you can do it inside of this. That's the thing. You guys have one of the more robust offerings of any of the Microsoft-centric security-centric customers that we have, right? And I like going on here because you guys come up with the coolest names. So your marketing is pretty good too. Whoever they are, I like that. Also, I judge companies by one more thing. I immediately go look at your stuff and I go to your career site. View open positions. Copilot Studio pre-sales architect, 365 AI developer, M365 trainer, identity service architect, Purview architect, project manager, and of course, sales at the Yingo. You're not putting these out there if you're not growing of some set, or you're not thinking you're going to grow, right? So I see that you guys are still doing the things, right? And that's a good thing. Thanks for coming on the show. You guys are more than welcome. That last topic, we need to make another part. I want to go in depth and really talk about the data investigations piece with the Security Copilot. I really want to see what your take is on that, right? Because we've had other partners who come in and sort of talked about how Security Copilot is pivoting them to put more effort into some of the custom things that they're making. And I want to hear your slant on this also. So thank you so much for coming on. Always welcome to come on. We'll figure out the Discord, throw your stuff in there. Really identify yourself too. There is no shame to say, hey, I'm with Cyclotron. Put it on there and this is what we do. Yeah, and do it. So everyone, thanks for coming to the second show on paper for July, which is Purview Summer Camp. Big shout out to Cyclotron for coming on. Very, very, very interesting. It sounds like you can make a career out of doing Purview at an expert level. I think you could. You know,
I have.
That's it. Brody, are you all in on Purview now?
No.
Okay. That was your thing.
I do whatever I need to.
All right.
But Purview's a component of it. But
All right.
definitely you can make a career out of it in this near term. Yep.
You can make a career out of it. But everyone, thanks so much. We look forward to having you here next Monday. Thank you, Frank, for coming in. Thank you, bro, for being here. Nathan, Austin, you always welcome. You guys do your thing. See you guys next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.